A speculative what-if battle is before us. Could a rifle platoon of US Marines defeat a whole Roman Empire legion? That's 43 soldiers with rifles and fancy modern equipment against over 5,000 men with swords and spears. Roman legion is not only a much bigger unit, sized between a modern-day brigade and a division, but is a unit with own logistics. And this clash of historic numbers versus modern tactical unit, who would come out on top? The big issue is one of fair setup. Short reach of Roman weapons would not suit the Romans unless the two sides start very close to one another. Flat terrain without cover might again suit the Marines, as they could get clear shots over long distances. Or are there forests abound? In such conditions, Marines may not be able to see farther than a few dozen yards, depending on the density of the foliage. Is the climate very cold or very hot? Either might be problematic for the Marine platoon, as it is a small tactical unit, not designed to operate independently for many days. Platoons carry small rations of food and water, enough for barely a few days. Exact size of a legion is not a clear-cut number. Some estimates are held in higher regard than others though, so Bynkov will go with this. Roughly 4,800 to 5,120 soldiers, roughly 150 more officers, additional 120 scouts and messengers on horses, between 60-ish and several hundred artillery weapon specialists, and upward of 1,000 additional supply train personnel, civilians on pay and slaves, some of which had spears and were tasked with aiding in the protection of the supply train. That's what would constitute a core legion, circa 2nd or 3rd century AD. In actual wars, legions were almost always supported by auxilia troops. Those would mostly be local-bred units, which were usually the main source of attack cavalry and ranged units. With all those, actual legion and its accompanying auxilia was at times known to reach 11,000 personnel. For simplicity's sake, those auxilia units will not be accounted for, as they were not core part of a legion. But at the same time, the Marines will not get anything that's not organic part of their rifle platoon. So even though the higher units such as the Marine Battalion would in actual wars give detachments of heavier weapon units to fight alongside the platoon, or an engineering team with landmines, here the platoon will be all by itself. Giving Marines vehicles would also not make the scenario interesting, as the Marines could just spend all the ammo the vehicles have, causing numerous casualties, then disengage, moving hundreds of miles within a day if needed. If both sides don't know who their enemy is, but get orders to find them and hunt them down, Marines should fare better. While they may be surprised at first to see a Roman legion, Romans are a known quantity for them. But Romans seeing Marines would be in a hell of a surprise once the rifles start firing and their comrades start dying hundreds of yards away from the enemy. Faced against something new to them, loud and frightening, almost magic-like bullets and explosions, the Romans are very unlikely to remain coherent as a unit. The Romans are much more likely to quickly start fleeing and eventually disintegrate as an organized opponent. So to make things a bit more even, let us assume that Romans also have some knowledge of their enemy from before. Perhaps some other Roman units captured a few other Marines earlier and have gotten to inspect their weapons and gear. Even though they may not fully understand how they work, they are likely to learn of what such weapons and gear are capable of. So then a Roman legion is dispatched to try and kill a known enemy unit, perhaps in an effort to seize even more of their almost godlike weapons and equipment. At the same time, the Marines know some of their comrades have been captured and that there is likely a whole legion out there looking for them. Do they flee or do they engage? If they're not sure there's just one legion, they would likely try to flee. After all, they're a much smaller unit and therefore much more mobile. While the enemy does have some horses, those are not numerous and aren't a threat on their own. Let us remember, the 120 or so horseback riders the legion has are not primarily a combat force. While they have swords for self-defense, they're mostly scouts and messengers. Even if Romans gave them spears, neither the horses nor riders are accustomed to charges onto enemies. If Romans still try to press on with a cavalry charge, those 120 riders would likely be slaughtered. They would be spotted from afar, raising up dust and being larger targets than an average human. And then concentrated fire would whittle down their numbers until the attack falls apart. Even if the riders don't change their mind and don't flee upon seeing half of their comrades killed, the horses are likely to just go wild when 40mm grenades start landing left and right to them. Grenadiers could deliver precision fire to 150 meters and reach area-sized targets up to 350 meters away. It's highly unlikely a single horseback rider would actually reach the Marines, unless they manage to sneak up to them. Marines could start firing from several hundred yards away. First the marksmen with better rifles and scopes. Then from 300 to 400 yards away, the rest of the Marines could fire with sufficient accuracy. Sure, a lot of those would be misses at such distances, but as legionaries get closer, accuracy would improve. Starting from, say, 400 yards away and running at an average of 15 seconds per 100 yards, Romans are likely to be exposed for some 60 seconds. Marines could run away to keep the distance, but if they do that, they can't shoot. So unless they're running to get to a better defensive position, they're likely to stay put and just lay prone to improve their aim. How accurate can soldiers be with today's rifles and scopes? Here are results of some recent testing. Bench results are mechanical limits of the weapon, basically taking the soldier out of the accuracy equation. Qualification is what average soldier can achieve in shooting trials, when he has a fair amount of time to take a steady aim, and when he's not under threat or stress. Combat stress results are from simulated combat conditions, and the accuracy drops quite a bit. Important to note, those simulations include soldiers being shot at, so stress levels are likely higher than what a soldier shooting from 300 yards away at a guy with a sword would be. 300-yard results against Romans would plausibly be somewhere in between of qualification and combat stress results. As Romans get closer, under 100 yards away, a mass of guys with swords running towards the Marines would likely lead to stress levels comparable to ones from the simulation. To sum it up, marksmen at up to 500 yards away would probably be aiming at targets standing out, like ballista crews, officers and horse riders, and might achieve 20 to 25% hit rates against stationary targets. Let's try to crunch some numbers. Each of the three marksmen could hit one legionary every 5 or so seconds at 500 or so yards. At 300 yards, each of the 34 gun-firing Marines could need a second or two to successfully hit a Roman, followed by a second or two more to pick a new Roman target. Marines firing at 200 yards would hit targets a bit more often. At 100 yards, combat stress would start becoming a big factor, but the weapon system precision overcomes it and overall accuracy still increases. 60-something seconds would be needed to cover the 400 yards, so here's a table of Romans shot by the time they cover a certain distance. At 50 yards or less, Marines' accuracy could get very high, possibly killing a Roman with almost every bullet, every 1 or 2 seconds or so, if the soldiers could remain cool-headed. Notice the video mentions 34 gun-firing Marines. That's because there are 9 grenadiers in the platoon. Instead of shooting their rifles, they could shoot a 40mm grenade every 10 seconds, hitting a ballista-sized target from 150 meters away or lobbing a grenade into a wider area from 350 meters away. Grenades can be deadly if they land in an area with lots of enemies. Still, they pack little explosive filler and produce a limited number of fragments. The farther a person is from their detonation point, the more likely it is they will not get hit by fragments. How would the Romans even be positioned? Being in a very tight formation is not good, not only for surviving grenades, but it would also offer their enemy a dense forest of bodies, meaning Marines could afford to just lay down automatic fire and be fairly certain most bullets would hit something. At several meters between each Roman soldier, individual aim for rifles becomes important. Semi-automatic fire would get preferred to automatic one, which would waste too many bullets into empty spaces. If Romans are advancing in lines, say 2 meters between each of them, and a dozen meters between lines, several might be killed outright by each 40mm grenade, with several more neutralized due to wounds. Grenadiers are more limited with time than with number of grenades they carry, as Romans could cover those 400 yards in roughly a minute. During that time, each grenadier could fire roughly 6 grenades and neutralize some 60 or so Romans. Also, when and if Romans get to some 40 yards or so of the Marines, another option opens up for the Marines: hand grenades. Most soldiers don't carry many of them though, but they are a bit deadlier than 40mm grenade. Still, we might be looking at 100 or more hand grenades thrown, with a lot of casualties on the Roman side. At 20 or so yards away, Romans could use their pilums, spears that they usually threw just before charging onto their enemies with swords. If hundreds of Romans were still around, a rain of spears could present quite a threat to the Marines, if for nothing else than because of the psychological factor. but it's unlikely pilums would even be carried by Romans. To get an answer why, we need to go way back to when the battle is planned for. If Romans get to know some basic information about the capabilities of their enemy, they would come to the conclusion they would suffer huge casualties. So if they still press on with the attack, they would need to plan it accordingly. Usual tight Roman formations would be useless. It would only make them better targets for US automatic fire. For grenades, not so much actually, as bodies first to be in line of incoming fragments would protect most of the bodies behind. So the soldiers would need to lose most of their equipment to make them able to run fairly fast for over 400 yards. Which is why they would most likely be ordered to carry only their swords. Running with a large shield and a long spear is too cumbersome. In theory, all the casualties mentioned up until now, while steep, still allow Romans enough survivors to slaughter the Marines with swords. But would that actually happen? Almost certainly not. The main reason is human psychology. Let's say the Roman legion to face the Marines is handpicked for their loyalty, bravery, etc. They may be told what to expect, they may even be told about explosion that will kill a dozen of them at once. But once they actually start charging and see their friends die at an alarmingly fast rate, they will fall apart as a unit. They will get scared, and as soon as they see some larger groups of their fellow soldiers running away, they will say screw this and turn away as well. Romans would get routed before they reach the Marines in such a fight, out in the open. There is simply no historical precedent for an event where an army unit loses roughly half of its force and still keeps charging. In ancient Roman battles, the winning side had usually 10 to 20% of dead and wounded. The losing side would have a bit more dead, up until a point where they broke apart and started to flee. That's where steep additional casualties often came in, especially if the winner had a cavalry to pursue those fleeing soldiers. So, if Romans could be robots without fear, then yeah, they could win. But realistically, they could withstand perhaps 1,000 or 2,000 casualties before their ranks break up and a mass rout begins. There are additional issues for Romans. Having formations where there's 2-meter distance between two legionaries in a line is very hard to achieve and upkeep in a battle. To get the most out of the charge, all Romans would need to be in a single line. But that's not possible. That would call for a line that's over 10 kilometers long. One needs to organize that line first and then keep it oriented towards the enemy, who needs to be stupid enough to just let the Romans waste hours on organizing such a formation. Furthermore, edges of the line would need to advance first, and middle of the line would need to wait. It all calls for precise organization that's extremely unlikely over such distances and running speeds required. Most likely the whole line would just dissolve into a huge mass of people running somewhere, most of them not even knowing where, as they would not see their enemy. Having several lines would be better. While that means not all Romans would be reaching the Marines at once, and more time would be given to the Marines to shoot, in practice it would make the whole formation more manageable. Still, having even 5 lines would make each line 2 kilometers long. Perhaps even borderline manageable, with various signals and cavalry messengers, but depending on the exact terrain, still way too cumbersome. Realistically, Marines would simply run away before Romans get organized. Ideally, and what would solve most of Roman problems, would be an ambush. To somehow get the Marines to walk into an area where Romans already encircled them. But that's extremely implausible, unless Marines believe no threat exists in their surroundings. Also, while there are terrains that might suit Romans better, such as the woods, it's unlikely that Marines would get themselves into such a situation. Once they know they're under threat, they might seek clear terrain without obstacles. Romans would have their cavalry scouts, with which they could cover more ground while seeking the Marines. But Romans lack optics the Marines have. Marines could spot a horse rider from over a mile away, a few times greater distance than what the Romans would enjoy. Then there's the issue of nighttime. The fact Marines are more mobile as a unit would dictate when engagements could take place. And since every Marine in the platoon does have night vision goggles, it means the Marines could actually be the ones attacking the Legion. They could roughly track the location of the Roman Legion during the day, then send out scouts to pinpoint the location during nighttime, and then perform raids during nighttime, using sniper shots from afar and lobbing grenades from a few hundred yards away at concentration of Roman soldiers. Such attacks, especially if done over a few consecutive nights, would have grave impact on Roman morale, as Romans could simply not see who is attacking them. They could at best deduce the direction the gunfire comes from, but during nighttime, trying to organize a large formation to go into that pitch black would be impossible. It is thus likely the Roman legion would fall apart within days under such raids from the Marine platoon, and its legionaries would simply desert. Various tactical shenanigans the Romans could try mostly require daytime to work. They could try and bring the cavalry behind the Marines as the Roman lines are charging the front, but while it would mean more bullets spent and a bit more panic, and the result would still likely be the Romans breaking lines and routing before they reach the Marines. Romans could burn vegetation, both to box in the Marines and cover own movements, but the Marines would be able to simply run away from a wildfire and choose not to go into dangerous areas. Marines' only real limitation would be the food and water. In a very inhospitable environment, such as a desert, they may die of thirst first, as Roman unit carries more water per person. Even if they kill half the Romans first, the remaining half may declare themselves victors if they remain to live longer. But those are extremely specific situations. In most other situations, the Marine platoon comes out on top. They could perhaps even deal with better part of 2 Roman legions before reaching their limits, which would be dictated by the number of bullets carried. These figures are quite relative though, as Marines would carry as many rounds as they think they might need. If they got whisked away into the Roman times while on some boring patrol, they might carry less. If someone told them they're to fight a Roman legion up front so they get a chance to stock up, they might double the number of bullets carried. Bottom line is, swords and spears are unlikely to defeat modern night vision, optics, rifles and grenades. At least not with these ratio of numbers. Oh, and before you go, think about subscribing if you like my content. If you want to be notified of my upcoming videos, subscribing is not enough. You also have to click that bell-shaped notification icon. And if you're viewing Binkov on a phone, notifications from YouTube also need to be turned on. Well, that's it for now. Salutations! And remember, Binkov may talk about hypothetical wars, but only real peace can bring us all together.